goofy for a minute while Tanner gets us live. Good day, everyone. Welcome to Thursday on the VUU, or as QuianaDenae Perkins would say, the VUU. It is really wonderful to be here with you today. This is Michael Tino, joining you from Peekskill, New York, a little bit north of New York City, where it is a cold, gray, rainy day, and that's fine because I'm stuck in the house at least until Sunday. Thanks to the raging pandemic and its effects on my family. All fun and dandy, but because everybody is feeling great today. How are you today, Dawn?
I am well. I am currently in Summers Point, New Jersey, which is where the osteo is, where I get to have my I don't know what this is, the splint turned into a cast or whatever. Anyway, I'm glad for that. And it is sort of a gray, it feels like this, we should have had this day in March. You know, it's that sort of gray, cloudy, wants to rain but won't. And it's somewhere around 50-ish. On the bright side, though, I think my lilac is going to bloom this year. This is the first time since I've transplanted it from Maine. And forsythias are out everywhere here. So that's just awesome. That's raising my spirits. Want to say hi to Tanner, who's being invisible behind the chalice and monitoring all of the chat stuff that you post and questions that you write to our panelists today. And we are, Michael and I are left largely unsupervised, which may or may not ever happen again, because the remainder of the hosts of the VUU are at Finding Our Way Home this week, which is being held virtually, which is what it is. But we are thinking of them and wishing them all the best in their time of collegial connection and bonding and rejuvenation. So, and I'll hand it back to Michael because I've run out of things to say.
Yeah, so our love to everyone at Finding Our Way Home. And other things going on in Unitarian Universalism this week. I guess President Susan Frederick Gray issued a statement encouraging congregations to stay virtual, which I find the leadership helpful, paying attention to science and public health, and as the co-minister of an all-virtual congregation, I don't mind it at all. But as the minister of a bricks and mortar congregation, it's good to ease people's anxiety about the fact that we are still not back together in person, because we need to just keep our anxiety in check. It will happen eventually, but not until it's actually safe for us to do that. Other things worth mentioning in the greater world of Unitarian Universalism this week.
The MFC meets next week.
Oh, yes.
Yes, which means we won't see Michael next week because he will be hip deep in Zoom meetings and packets and interviews and everything else. And so I just want to offer a prayer, having gone through that not too long ago, for all of the people for whom this is sort of the culmination of a very long, arduous process, and for those who have to evaluate them and check them out and kick the tires. It's a lot of work. Also, and I think, am I wrong in saying that the MFC, the UUA nominating committee is still looking for, is that accurate, Michael? Still looking for volunteers for the MFC and volunteers for the something else?
The appointments committee, I'm pretty sure, is looking for people to apply to be on the MFC and various other UUA committees. I don't know the whole list. It's on uua.org somewhere. But there are a couple of openings on the MFC, If you're not, for those out there in VUU land, because I don't like to speak in acronyms, the MFC is the Ministerial Fellowship Committee. It is the committee of our Association of Congregations that admits people to um, full standing as ministers in right relationship with our association. We are not the committee that ordains people. Only congregations can vote to ordain individual ministers, but the MFC, the Ministerial Fellowship Committee, admits people to what's called ministerial fellowship, which is basically standing and right relationship with our association of congregations. And I am pleased to be able to serve on that committee and was very excited that the whole committee participated in part 1 of 3 of a training from the Transforming Hearts Collective, led by Alex Capitan and Michael Slack. And so, with that, this is our fabulous segue into introducing our guests, because Alex Capitan is one of our guests. Alex is a lay community minister, educator, editor, consultant, and organizer. Z is the co-founder of the Transforming Hearts Collective and the founder of Radical Copy Editor, an anti-oppressive language project. We have with us the Reverend Andre Cornelia Moll. And Andre is the minister at Central Unitarian Church in Paramus, New Jersey. We also have Casey Slack. The Reverend Casey Slack is the minister of the UU Church of the Verdugo Hills in La Crescenta, California, just outside of Los Angeles. They also work as a sex educator with More Than Sex Ed and serve on the board of Enfleshed, in addition to probably too many other things. That is their official bio. I love it. And finally, on our fabulous, fabulous show today is the Reverend Elizabeth Mount, who is the minister of the First UU Church of Indiana, Pennsylvania, which is in Pennsylvania and not Indiana. Elizabeth graduated from Meadville Lombard Theological School, received ministerial fellowship in 2018, and before seminary, they were an organizer with environmental and Latinx community projects in Western North Carolina, the Appalachian coal fields, and the highlands of Guatemala. They've also served our association on our Journey Toward Wholeness Transformation Committee, engaging in anti-racism and anti-oppression work. So welcome, Alex, Andre, Casey, and Elizabeth. Today we are celebrating transgender, trans, non-binary, genderqueer, Unitarian Universalists of all sorts. Last fall, we had a show honoring the Trans Day of Remembrance, which is a somber holiday, and when we a commemoration, uh, and when we had that show, we made a promise to the folks who came to discuss that somber holiday that we would balance that show with at least one celebratory show to celebrate transgender identity and awareness and visibility. And yesterday, many of you probably saw, was called in many places the Transgender Day of Visibility. Though there are some people using different language for it. And I know Alex and Andre, you have thoughts and feelings on this, and maybe we want to start there. Alex?
I say Andre first because Andre actually led a service last night
Okay.
that used
Andre?
different language.
Yeah, we were, me and my colleagues here in New Jersey were leading a service that we called a Trans Day of Empowerment celebration. And this came out of a conversation that I had with a number of folks actually in Trust, where we were talking about like why visibility. I mean, not only is the word ableist, but why does that sound like a goal? And there's a history there, but more so like we were looking at it as, well, empowerment is what we really want. And that includes more than just one sense. That's our ability to be and recognized for being our whole selves, and also for accepting the gifts that we have to offer as trans and non-binary folks. So that's what we went with for our title. But I know when I was having this discussion, there were many other beautiful names out there that folks were throwing out.
Yeah, I'm so happy that you all decided to do that, Andre, because it's so inspiring. I know I think to myself, oh gosh, it's already named. We can't rename it. And then people are like, well, why not? Of course we can rename something. And I was actually reading this really lovely piece in Them, which is a great online media source. That was an interview with the founder of Trans Day of Visibility, Rachel Crandall Crocker, who founded it in 2009. And she was saying that if she could do it again, she wasn't sure that she would found something called the Trans Day of Visibility because of all of the nuances around that frame and that concept, right? The goals are solid. The goals are fantastic. Everyone agreed. I think the entire community or multiple communities of trans people agreed that we needed more than just a single day of the year that the rest of the world was paying attention to trans people, and that single day of the year being a day that's basically a funeral, right? That's our funeral for all of the people we've lost over the past year to anti-trans violence. And we wanted something else, someday where we got to actually celebrate resilience and survival and thriving and joy and authenticity and all of these things. And so the term and the word visibility is so incredibly inadequate and also problematic to try to define that. But that's what this holiday, that's what this day is meant to be all about. So it really doesn't matter so much what we call it. What matters is we don't treat it as just a trans specific National Coming Out Day. That's not what it is. It's not about people needing to bare their souls or be visible in particular ways to the cis world, right? It's about celebrating ourselves within our own spaces and being able to really shine in whatever ways we can have access to, and also hold the reality that visibility itself is such a tricky thing for our community, right? Because visibility can lead to violence. Visibility has led to violence. So much of the backlash and the awful anti-trans legislation that we're seeing come out across the country over the last couple of years has been a direct result of the increased visibility of trans communities. So that's really real. And then, of course, there are so many people who can't be visibly themselves for so many reasons. So the last thing any of us want to do, I'm sure, is to sort of create a situation where those folks who have to sort of remain invisible in so many different ways feel like they're left out of this day of being able to celebrate that they are alive. And that's what matters most, right? So those are some thoughts.
Sounds almost, and this is way oversimplistic, like Pride. Maybe we'll get a parade at some point. That'd be fun.
I really appreciated what you shared on Facebook yesterday, Casey, about that whole thing. And I would love if you would share some of that wisdom with the world because it was so fire.
Thank you. Sure. Yeah, I wrote a post on Facebook yesterday, literally while like finishing my makeup in the morning, because I was reading Facebook, and I live in Los Angeles, so by the time I'm up and doing things, you all have had like half a day, and I'm always like catching up. And so I was sitting there and I was doing my makeup, and I read something, too many things, that just kind of, I was so mad about visibility yesterday, and I am not usually that mad about it, but I'll just read you what I wrote. It's not very long. So, what if I don't want to be visible today? What if I'm tired of willing myself into existence in the minds of people actively choosing not to see me? What if exposing my sensitive places, pulling out my trembling heart to remind you that I'm real, is more than I think you've earned today? What if I don't care about visibility when survival is an active question? What if we existed outside of remembrance or visibility? What if you let us be as ordinary and extraordinary as we are? What if you did better? What if twice annual displays of our trauma were replaced, help supplemented with daily care, with the real and world-changing work of cis people doing better already. What, instead of visible or remembered for a day, we could just be free. And that really, like, that's very much the place that I was emotionally yesterday. I think still today, that's where I'm at. There's this way that when the 2 days we have are Remembrance and Visibility Day, first of all, just kind of gets made into another like public trauma project. But it's like your options are spectacle or sad story. And my experience of our lives is so much more than that. And my experience of our community is so much more than that, and is this like beautifully ordinary and also completely extraordinary thing that gets just lost in having to all the time be like, no, but we're dying. No, but we're dying. No, but we're dying. And to see such focus recently on hurting trans kids specifically, when like there are so many things that we could be paying attention to. There are so many things we could be doing. And so to be like, oh, Visibility Day, when the world is what it is, just feels like, ugh, real heavy.
Amen.
You, Casey.
Yeah.
Yeah, just yes to that.
I'm thinking like when we did our service, I was thinking a lot about, first we designed the service because it was by trans and non-binary folks for trans and non-binary folks. And everybody was welcome to attend, but I noticed that gave me, as one of the co-creators, kind of a framing for this, which was getting out of that space of trauma and, putting these, our hurts out there for other people to witness. And it was specifically about, who are we, and, what is it about our experiences that are beautiful and unique, and how lucky are we to be trans and non-binary folks? And the main question, we had a number of reflections from people on the show, and the main question we asked was, how has your identity informed your spirituality? And I've been reflecting on that because it was really beautiful to hear different folks join in the service and talk about that. But I also noticed from being in the background, I think that question was surprising because it's not something we're often asked, to share in space together. And because it's about like, not what are the hurts that I'm going to put on display, but what is it about my experience that's unique about how I experience the world that's going to be different from cis folks. And I think we need more of that on days like this, and every day, as you're saying, Casey. Like, that's beautiful.
Yeah, that what you're saying, Andre, makes me think of, I do trainings for clinical pastoral education residents in some hospitals around Los Angeles around LGBT competencies, basically. And I wind up talking a lot about trans stuff because in Los Angeles, gay, lesbian, bisexual, that's like pretty old hat. We kind of got that. But there's a lot of education needed for trans folks. And in the context of people who have like theological degrees, people whose work is ministry, the thing I always wind up saying is trans people know stuff. Trans people have special access to a certain kind of divine knowledge about changing. And when I do chaplaincy, it's so much about like, how do we walk through a change together? And I always say, if you have the opportunity to work with someone who is trans, who will talk to you, because our ability to talk to chaplains in a hospital is shaky. I would be the same. I have no feelings about that on anyone else's behalf. But if you have the opportunity to get someone to open up to you, there is such knowledge in our bodies about what it is to say, okay, this is over. And now I'm doing this other thing, which is more life-giving, which is more calling towards what spirit is saying to me about me. The way that you have to let go of something that feels maybe a little more stable in order to live into something that is full and beautiful is really spiritually powerful and special knowledge that I think we get access to by virtue of existing in these interesting bodies and this interesting construction of stuff.
Well, and
Super
I know,
resonates.
yeah, I know that at least for me, there's also the experience of having rejected the boxes that other people were trying to put me in and assumed that I was part of. And I'm always filtering theologically everything through this. Is that a box that I accept? is that a set of categories that that is necessary? Is that a set of categories that I see myself in at all? And there's always permission for the answer to be no. Um,
Which
Elizabeth
is so
Mount,
profoundly UU, honestly.
right? Isn't it?
I mean, I certainly feel like this is a very queer and trans faith. I mean, not just because I'm a queer and trans person who is a UU, but that ability for multiple truths to be true, that ability, that spiritual practice of questioning, right? All of that is so absolutely in sync, right, within Unitarian Universalism.
Yeah, and so I just wanted to chime in here because, like, queering theology is inherent to the development of Unitarian and Universalist threads of religious thought. We're like, okay, but what if is kind of how we do religion. It's the repurposing, re-narrating stories that people are trying to use as exclusive texts to be like, but actually, there's something wider, there's something deeper, there's something more loving here. There is something more expansive than anyone can imagine. That's the God that we want here. That's the God that we believe in. That's the affirmation that we need as a society. And we're doing it. I also just wanted to say, like, this whole trans day of visibility always brings up for me the, like, there's a reactivity to, like, how dare you be taking up space that is happening right now societally. And, like, the reason that trans people need a day to take up space is because people are actively writing us out of history. But when you go back to scriptural texts, when you look at, like, original stuff, and this is the moment where we get to, like, talk about Lil Nas X and Montero and all of that, because, like, there's a reason that piece of Plato is written on that tree. Like, this stuff keeps coming up throughout history. Like, people have always existed in all kinds of bodies with all kinds of feelings around gender, with different genders and more expansive understandings of gender in themselves and in society. This has never been new, and we're always glorious. And I just want to, like, bring us back to that. Like, this is a day to lift up that we're always here and always glorious.
Amen.
Wow.
I think it's important to remind folks that, you know, we've always been here and we always will be. You know, the language that we use may be new in its sound for us and for folks around us, but it's an ancient language that is just morphed over time, changed as we do.
Yeah.
And I would love to talk about language, because I think that the stories that you're talking about, Elizabeth, that's where I want to be. But I feel like in so many spaces, I get pulled back to language. You know, it's like the stumbling block over my pronouns, the stumbling block over my name, and thinking about how many of our reflections, even in the service we did last night, were about the just get my name right, just get my pronouns right. Like I need that. And I feel like, you know, what happens when we get stuck there is we're still talking about opening the door when we want to be in the space. And one of the things I've been thinking about is how, you know, to flip the way we think about the language we use as trans and non-binary folks. I mean, for me, the language we use is magical, right? I mean, literally part of my story, literally hearing the word genderqueer for the first time, opened up those boxes for me that you were talking about, Michael. Like, I don't use that word myself anymore, but being able to hear that word, literally, it was a spell that I needed to hear. And so the language that we create as trans and non-binary folks, this is a magical language that we claim and we use. It's not just some thing that you all get to like object to or like wrestle with. Do that in your own time. Listen to what we're saying and recognize that these words have deep, deep meaning that's beyond your grammatical understanding, and try to get to that and how it ties to our very way that we reveal ourselves in the world.
Amen. Amen. It reminds me of it actually goes full circle to me to talking about the spiritual gifts of trans people, because we have so many spiritual gifts, and not only have we been here forever, but so many societies and cultures dating back millennia have seen people who embody something other than woman or man exclusively as spiritual leaders, as folks who have inherent spiritual wisdom and leadership. And that's such a beautiful thing. If that is new to you, please check out Transgender Warriors by Leslie Feinberg, because it's all in there and it's absolutely it's canon. It's canon. It's amazing. So, but it makes me think about today. So many one of the things that Reverend Michael Slack and I talk about in the Trans Inclusion in Congregations program that we created a couple years ago is the fact that, you know, so many UU congregations and all sorts of congregations think of trans people as people in need of spiritual care, as opposed to understanding that trans people have spiritual gifts that we are coming into congregations bringing with us, right? We aren't just tragic figures. Trauma is real, but trauma also informs growth and spiritual gifts. So that's it. That's so huge. And when we get stuck on names and pronouns and language, we aren't allowing access to what's beyond that. We aren't allowing it. If we have to just fight to be able to stay present in a particular space without dissociating or feeling like we're being violated in some way, how are we going to be able to actually bring forward our spiritual gifts? I had this conversation with my mom years ago when it took her a number of years to sort of come to terms with my name change and my pronoun change and stuff like that, and she's there now, and it's wonderful because we get to have a really deep relationship because of it. But I said to her at the time, because I was just like at my wit's end, right? And I'm like, there was some conversation where she was like, do you still want to have kids someday? And I said, yes, but I'm never going to be a mother. And it just brought her up short, because it was one of those moments where I was able to say to her, look, if you can't get down with my pronouns, there's so much more out there. You're not going to be able to have a relationship with your grandkids if you can't literally just get past this hurdle. And it's the same thing in congregations. It's the same thing with trans ministers, right? We can't bring forward our gifts if we're just having a daily battle about whether you can call us by our names, right? So I'm really glad you brought that up, Andre.
Yeah, and I'm like, I say this so often, but the pronouns thing and when we get stuck on it, it's not about whether or not like that conversation is tiring. Like, cool, sometimes it is. but it's the absence of all the other conversations we could be having that is the real tragedy. Is like, if we're just having this conversation 400 times, there are 399 other really cool things we could have talked about.
There was a really great graphic I saw floating around the internet yesterday that was 2 separate pie charts. And the first one was like what media thinks trans issues are. And it was just bathrooms and pronouns. And then the other one was what trans issues actually are. And like bathrooms and pronouns are in there, but there's so much else. And like right now, maybe we have a third thing in public, right? Sports, bathrooms, pronouns, sports. And those are all important things, but like, housing and also like flourishing, right? Both like basic needs and the ability to do more than meet our basic needs are left on the table then. And pronouns are just the beginning of a conversation. Being able to go to a bathroom is just the beginning of being able to be in a place. And I think about what we talk about when we say, you know, anyone who comes into our congregation is going to change the congregation, because what happens when the community is the thing is that who's there changes who's there. And it's the same thing, right? If you can't get past the first conversation, you can't get changed. And that's kind of the whole thing, getting changed in a way that expands your sense of what's possible. We get so caught in, I make a joke sometimes that people behave as though we like invented queers at Stonewall. And then like we invented trans people in like maybe the 90s and also maybe like 2012, right? Like we brand new, but no, not brand new at all. As long as there have been people, there have been queer and trans people, like our tech, like you go back and you read ancient texts and there we are. Now, we might not call ourselves trans people in ancient texts because, I mean, first of all, we didn't speak English, so why that construction wouldn't have come up. But also, there's this thing of getting stuck on the right language. And this is maybe a more complicated conversation than we fully have time for, but there's a habit of white cis heteropatriarchal society that is about doing it correctly, is about rules more than it is about care or connection. And so this thing where people are like, no, but they is plural. First of all, no. Second of all, not the point.
Right? Yes. Yes.
Amen to all of that.
Yeah, it was interesting. Like my congregation that I serve has been working with mixed success on getting my pronouns right. They're more and more getting it. But it's I find now that they're correcting each other, as opposed to me always saying, I'm not she. You know, if I'm in a board meeting and somebody misgenders me, other board members will say, that's wrong, you use they. Which is really like, that helps. That helps. And like, how much other stuff could we be talking about, please, you know, if this weren't the thing, you know? I struggle with the legend around how awesome resilience is, because without trauma, you wouldn't need resilience, you know? So yay, we're resilient. Well, there's a reason for that, because the ones of us that weren't resilient are dead. You know, the ones of us who weren't able to create incredibly complex and individual survival systems and survival skills didn't make it, right? And so those of us that are here, we are the survivors, we are the resilient, but if we didn't have to be resilient, we wouldn't be so few. you know?
Yeah. And I think it's
So,
worth noting too that like some of us who were really resilient didn't make it either, because so much of that is also luck.
And
and
privilege.
privilege.
Yeah. Privilege and
Yeah.
luck. Yeah.
Privilege. Yeah, totally. Yeah. I have to say we are just past halfway through this hour, and normally I end the hour and I sort of have to take a breath and be like, wow, my brain is full. I need to take a breather for a minute. And now I'm like, oh God, my brain is full already. And yeah, so much good stuff is being said today. So much good stuff. Mm. Like my brain is full. I need somebody else to talk.
I mean, I'm like, we could change the tone entirely. We've been having a whole little side conversation about the like trans folks have always existed for on the side. But which like brings me all the way back to that piece about naming, that it's never a conversation. I think folks who are not trans think this is a conversation about grammar, and they're trying to like do it right or like respect the rules. But the power of naming is literally like, Madeline Illingel says this better than I do, but naming is what gives form to the cosmos we see despite all the chaos.
Mm.
Say that again?
She says that naming gives form to the cosmos we see despite all the chaos. And she's talking about like cosmos as the physical form, and kairos like the divine, and chaos being alternate poles, and that like naming is framing, and the people who have the power to name or choose not to name are the people guiding the conversation. And so when you don't give someone their name, it's not like, oh, but grammar. It's you are doing violence to a person, and you can't. Like you need to stop doing that. You need to practice it 5,000 times or whatever you need to do, and then get there. All of which is to come back around to like, people have been doing this forever. And we were just talking, like, there's the public universal friend who was this fabulous Quaker person way the heck back, 1800s, 1700s. I'm bad at dates. But this person, the public universal friend, known as Poof to the public universal friends, was out there being like, to heck with this, you shall not call me by pronouns. I choose no as my gender of preference. No, thank you.
Wow.
Big mood, public universal friend. Big mood.
Mm-hmm. So amazing. And also what you were saying, Elizabeth, you know, it's like, if there was one thing that I could use a magic wand to help the Unitarian Universalist movement with, it would be getting out of our heads and getting into our hearts. Because that to me is what is at the root of the whole but grammar and the whole correctness over care. Thank you so much for what you were saying about that, Casey. Like, do we care more about care, or do we care more about correctness and intellectualism and being right? And having an investment in our own perspective being the right, the best perspective, right? Because that's not what this faith is actually about. it has been so much harder to interact with people who feel the need to intellectually understand my identity before they will call me by my name. And as Teresa Soto reminds us, pronouns are just a shorter version of our names, right? So when we say that, that's what we're saying. It's so much harder to interact with those sorts of people who just literally won't do the thing before they can intellectually understand it, versus the people like my partner's family who are all working class. His dad was illiterate until he was an adult, like they're from the deep south, and they didn't need to get me before they started calling me by the right name and pronouns. They just did it because their son loved me, and that was enough for them. And that was such a breath of fresh air, because it was so nice to just be like, you know what? We're going to build this relationship as we move through it. You don't have to intellectually understand me in order to be in relationship with me. I want that for our movement. And I feel like that can be applied to so many different things, right?
Amen. Yeah.
Oh yeah, and I have this whole sort of semi-patented rant about Unitarian Universalists and their fear of their own bodies, and I'm still mad at Channing. Because there's so many who are afraid to experience anything that doesn't happen from the neck up. And it is our fear of embodied experience that causes people to be frightened of or uncomfortable with those whose existence is about embracing embodiment. And yeah, I'd like Augustine and Channing. I kind of wish we had a hell, because I'd send them both there for the damage they've done to the human experience around pleasure and sexuality and bodies and wholeness.
Yeah, it's one of those places for me where like I can't stop seeing how we are the inheritors of Puritanism, right? Just our inability to like get with our bodies as a collective, right? Some of us are great at it, others less so. But we're people, white people, the West, Unitarian Universalists, real obsessed with stuff making sense. And friends, I don't know if you've seen the world, but nothing makes any sense. Nothing actually makes sense. And so what if we just like let go of the need? Like up here, we want to be like a category, a thing that makes sense. Down here, stuff can get messy. We can feel weirder, more complicated stuff with our bodies than our brains really like. And it's hard. It would be nice if things made sense, if somebody somewhere knew what they were doing. Unfortunately, nobody knows what they're doing.
Congress would be a great place for that to start.
Right? Right. But here's the world that we live in, and like nature's favorite thing is, hey, look at this weird thing I did. Birds process the magnetic poles of the planet as visual information. Snakes taste heat. I don't know anything. So what if we just like allow that to be true?
Which doesn't mean that we shouldn't still try, right?
No, absolutely.
No, I love all of that. But I also am just sitting here thinking about the fact that the number one reason why I hear from people when they sign up for me and Michael's course, the number one reason why they do is because they're afraid of getting things wrong. And they don't want to cause harm to the trans people in their lives, in their congregations. They want to get it right, and they're not sure how. And so this isn't us saying, just throw your hands up in the air and call people anything, whatever goes. Like that's not it. But we are saying, let go of that being your motivating factor. Is, it's a good motivating factor to not want to cause harm. That's great. But if the motivating factor is, I want to get things right, I want to be perfect, I want to be a good person because I've been taught that if I'm not perfect, I'm not a good person. Let go of that. Let go of that for your own soul. You are a good person. You are inherently good. That is something that we believe, right? Certainly something I believe as a Unitarian Universalist. And allow yourself the gift of just being able to build relationship with people rather than trying to intellectually understand everything first. And it will flow if you center relationship and care for the person and the people that you're interacting with, as opposed to fear of getting it wrong and being seen in a particular way or having a particular impact on people. If you're in relationship, you can work that stuff out, right? That's what's beautiful about relationship. So don't forget that part.
Well,
Right.
and it's interesting. Oh, Andre, go ahead.
I was just going to bring it back to gifts that we have as trans and non-binary folks, right? Like, so, all of us have had to wrestle in one way or another with our gender. And that is not something that any of us could have done just up here, right? That's all something that we needed to do by tapping into other wisdom. Yeah, some of it's intellectual, but much of it was emotional, spiritual, and feeling our bodies and learning to trust that. I know for me was huge. Learning to trust that my body was telling me something in a way that I could be in the world. So if you have spiritual leaders in your congregation who are trans and non-binary and saying, hey, this is more than just up here. They're not just we're not just making this up. Like, we have some deep, deep experience to offer that type of wisdom to others. So that's part of the gift, I think, that we offer. And if we're not, as a religious community, part of what we're doing is trying to make meaning out of that chaos. So if we're just outright rejecting some meaning making that's being offered by our trans and non-binary folks, we're doing ourselves a disservice as part of our collective meaning making within a congregation.
Yeah, Kathy Bauer in our chat says mind intelligence is so much easier than heart intelligence for many of us. It's one of my biggest challenges. Thank you, Kathy. Because I think that, Casey, what part of what I heard you saying is that nothing makes sense, but that is if you are looking at what makes sense through this very narrow, like, white supremacy culture, heteropatriarchal, cisgender, like, prism. If it has to make sense in that very narrow space, right? If I have to be able to do a controlled scientific experiment about something in order for my mind to understand it, and that means it makes sense, then nothing makes sense. But, like, your gender makes sense to my heart. It, like, I don't have to have lived it.
Yeah. Lots of people have experiences that I don't have to have lived, and I can still feel into them. And I think this comment about mind intelligence being easier than heart intelligence, I think we have to give ourselves some grace around that, because we are enculturated to mind intelligence and to a particular, like, repetitive kind of mind intelligence, right? Especially those of us who, like, got primary education in a world post No Child Left Behind, right? It's an education system really oriented towards repeat the correct things, be correct, not like feel and be with the ideas. That would be a much harder education to give in our current context. And I think we kind of loop back around to something Andre said earlier about the way that words can be spells and that words can be magic. And Andre's story about hearing the word genderqueer for the first time reflects actually a story in my life about hearing the word bisexual for the first time and being like, oh, what? You can, what? And so it's not right. Like, I actually don't believe that up here and down here are separate things. I just think they're not communicating super well. And the thing about words is that, like, the words you can say construct the things you can imagine a lot of the time. And so the words are really important, but also not the thing. And holding stuff lightly is hard.
Yeah. I'm going to just, like, haul this off on a little anti-capitalist tangent for a minute, because
I love it when you do that.
You're saying, like they're not communicating really well, that's not an incidental or an accidental thing that is happening. It is actually impossible to engage in our current economic system. And it's impossible, particularly as a white person, to engage with white privilege and be centered with your heart. And so, like, there is intentional cutoff happening in the ways that we are teaching children. And our faith formation as a religion needs to be doing that. All of what we're doing, the reason that I'm in ministry here is being like, we have to reattach that, because the intentional disconnect and the intentionally telling you that if you're feeling uncomfortable, that's okay somehow, is like how we run an economy while people are dying from our economy. So I'm just here being like, y'all, this is much bigger. And not in the like, there's a vast planetary lizard people conspiracy, but literally our educational systems are set up to allow us to function for the system rather than us trying to create humans who will change the systems.
Which is a whole nother just great like testimony to why this isn't an individual failing if you're struggling with it.
Right. But
so
like,
if you're out there listening to this and you're like, oh God, what? Like, that's part of it too, is that we've been conditioned to think that we are individual humans who individually have to figure out how to, what? No, that's actually not the way the world is set up. So yes, this is all much bigger.
But I'm like, so this Trans Day of Visibility, queer your entire educational system as a fun project.
I think that's a project.
Absolutely, yes. So I'm aware, painfully aware, that we now only have 5 minutes left in our show, and I want to make sure that you all have a last chance to leave our viewers and our podcast listeners with the take-home message that you want them to take away from this celebration of transness and non-binariness. Who wants to start? Casey, you're on my screen.
Sure. I just want to. Yesterday, I felt so many like heavy, difficult emotions, and today, getting to have this conversation with all of you and knowing that people are listening to it, seeing it, getting to engage in the conversation that is more than just, hey, I have some pronouns, could you use them? This is really enlivening, and I'm really, really glad to get to do this. And I'm really, really glad to get to be colleagues and friends with all of you. And for all of you who are watching, listening, whatever, you're good, and I love you. And I hope that we can work together to love each other into being full and whole and in our bodies, and the like wide diversity of humans who we actually are. That's my dream. Thank you.
Yeah, I can't top that.
I already made my pitch. Queer your world. Queer the world. Make it.
And we're gonna have to.
Okay.
And we're gonna have a whole show on anti-capitalist faith. At some point.
Yes,
That
please.
sounds awesome.
Andre?
Well, I think the thing that I keep on hearing us coming back to is, it's not about creating spiritual space for trans and non-binary folks. That's only doing a little bit. Like what we're talking about is actually recognizing the spiritual gifts that come from trans non-binary folks that are gifts that are for the world, not just us, right? And that's a whole different mindset.
Amen. I wanna leave us with an amazing quote from the amazing Janet Mock, who is a Black and Native Hawaiian trans woman and wrote the incredible book Redefining Realness. Please do yourself a favor and pick up a copy. It's amazing. And she wrote, self-definition and self-determination is about the many varied decisions that we make to compose and journey toward ourselves, about the audacity and strength to proclaim, create, and evolve into who we know ourselves to be. And that is the gift that trans people bring, is that all of us, doesn't matter your gender story, we all, when we are embodying self-determination and self-definition, we are embodying the audacity and strength to proclaim, create, and evolve into who we know ourselves to be. And all of us deserve that. You deserve that. Whoever you are watching this, I want that for you. I want the kind of joy that I get to experience every day from being my authentic self. That is such a huge gift, and everybody deserves it. So that's where I want to leave things.
Yeah.
Amen.
And I would like to say, just for those who are not able to share their truth because it's not safe, because it's too big and too scary for them right now, that you are worthy as well. That if you are not out and covered with sparkles and rainbows, doesn't make you less whole or less awesome than anyone on this panel today. Oh, Michael has their tiara. And we talk a lot about how glorious it is to be out and awesome and wonderful and glittered covered and all of that. And that is true. And it is still holy to do what you have to do to keep yourself alive and to be safe.
Amen. Blessed be.
Amen.
We need you to survive. Our siblings, we need you to survive. This has been another week on The View. It zipped by. It really did.
Wow.
And our brains and our hearts and our bodies and our beings are full and overflowing with beautiful transness. And we'll see you next week.
I need a nap. Bye,
You have a
everybody.
doctor's appointment.
Right? I do. Alrighty. Bye, everybody.